Good morning, church. How are we doing today? Good. Energy is high in the room this morning. You sound good. I'd love that Alan did the greeting this morning, but if I did, I would just say the same thing he said to me when he walked in my office and saw my outfit today. He just said, "Welcome to Target. How can I help you?" I said, "Yeah, you're doing the greeting. We can't do that." And then I was informed I look a little bit more like Jake from State Farm, so I can't win for losing. I don't have a Rogers rate, but I do have a Marcus match if you guys want to invest in my policies later today. But it's good to be with you again. We're moving down the home stretch in the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of the Kingdom. And I just want to commend you guys and just give an admonition. Last week was a heavy week. If you were here, that was a hard message to hear. And so I want to say I'm really appreciative because there were so many of you that actually followed up with me that day and then throughout the week. We live in a culture that is probably the least resistant to hearing hard things and dealing with hard things, maybe than any culture in history. And so unfortunately, sometimes that's the case in the church. And I think one of the things that's really special about our family here at Leander is that you guys are committed not to flinch away from hard things and hard questions and hard teaching. So last week was one of them, and I just want to say I'm really encouraged that you guys received that message with the heart that it was actually intended. And I think it's important for us to keep that with us as we continue forward today, because as we're going to see, the world is a crazy place. And if you're going to keep from getting caught up in the crazy, then you got to be firmly worded in nothing but the word of Jesus and that alone. So today, it's going to be a very different kind of message, a very different conversation, not quite as heavy, but it'll be challenging in its own right. It'll be challenging because we're in Matthew chapter 24, and that's one of the most debated passages in modern history. If you just open up your phone right now, or you were casually scrolling through before you came, you would have seen probably religious people and secular people alike making predictions about the future and the fate of empires and the signs of the times. And they do it with wild recklessness. Every week, there's a new prediction, a new prophecy that comes in. For several generations, this passage has been at the center of one of the most popular theological frameworks, because we as a people are obsessed with the end times. We're obsessed with the signs of the times. And so you may have heard at some point a term called the Rapture. And you may have been around a lot of teaching at some point in time. We're exposed to all of the ideas that swirl around it that have to do with current events and prophecy. We are obsessed as a people with the end of the world. We always have been obsessed as a people with the end of the world, and not even just Christian people, but all cultures the world over. It wasn't too long ago, 13 years actually, that people were claiming the Aztecs and the Mayans had predicted the end of the world. It was supposed to happen in 2012. It was just the latest in a long list of predictions. And over the years, folks have taken this passage and gone beyond being obsessed with knowing and talking about the end, but have fully gone to predicting it, right down to the day and the hour. And they've heaped up teachings and theologies and ideas. Some people have made entire careers out of talking about this and stringing along their followers. They've weaved it together like complex systems of dispensations and revelations. And there's been fiction books and movies and countless different Bible commentaries and evangelists, and even cults have sprung up around teachings that come out of this text. And so it's not an exaggeration if I said to you that there are some people who believe in Jesus who would tell you that teachings about the rapture and the end times and the great tribulation are an indisputable fact. And they will defend those like they would defend the virgin birth or the death and resurrection of Jesus himself. And over the years, that teaching has proliferated and has saturated into our culture so deeply, religiously and secularly, that many people believe that someday, in the twinkling of an eye, when all of the right prophetic conditions have been met, the real believers, the real Christians are going to be snatched away and caught up into heaven with Jesus, and they're going to leave behind a confused and fearful humanity to the horrors of a 7 or longer year tribulation period. And then after that time, the wrath of God is going to be poured out. And that is a great story. That is the stuff of cinema. And as a result, it's been packaged into an untold number of books and movies, and the evangelical prophetical complexes run wild, and our creative imaginations just take this to ever renewed levels every single generation. Some of you in this room are old enough to remember a book, The Late Great Planet Earth, by a guy named Hal Lindsey, and he really popularized this in the past generation. He had entire charts figured out where you could boil down to the month and day and the hour. This is how all the math works together, and this is when the second coming is going to be. Here's what you're going to look for. And then there's some folks a little bit younger than that will remember a series of books called Left Behind. Do you remember Left Behind? It's all about this teaching about the rapture and the end of the age and the second coming of Jesus. Now, Left Behind was so influential and popular that it sold 65 million copies. That's a lot. And somehow in the 65 million copies, it managed to traumatize 2 whole generations of church kids and at the same time spawn a major motion picture event starring Nicolas Cage. That's how crazy this is. That's how far it's gone. Now, the industries, the books, the movies, the radio programs, all of this has saturated culture to a point where these ideas have actually come out recently in the words and defense of 2 really prominent, influential politicians of our time who build their geopolitical philosophy based off of teachings that have been pulled from Matthew 24 and a few other places. And so, no matter what your political leaning is this morning, I think it's fair that you should be asking, is this stuff true? Where does this come from? Is it biblical? Are there signs of the times that I'm supposed to be interpreting, that I'm supposed to be reading to get myself ready? Is there going to be a rapture? Actually, do I need to be afraid that if I don't get my stuff together, I could be left behind? What does Matthew chapter 24 actually say? Now, I'm being very bold this morning, and it might be foolish or just ambitious to think that I can, in one Sunday, help us unpackage what we're about to dig into for a few minutes. Right? So I will say that the treatment that I'm going to be able to give you guys is going to be very high level. It will be accurate, but there are going to be tons of questions potentially that come out of this message, and that is okay. I am open to those. So just know ahead of time, rest in peace to my inbox, but it is open. If you have questions, if you want to go a little bit deeper, there's just some stuff that we won't be able to get to today. I'm going to try to help us unravel decades of speculation, bad prophecy, runaway misunderstandings here. And so I want to say that we have to do this, one, because so many of us have become familiar with this terminology and these teachings have seeped into our culture. We have to correct error where it stands. And also, because we're afraid to talk about it, we ignore that this idea of Jesus' second coming is mentioned at minimum 300 times in the New Testament. It's a big deal. That's once every 13 verses. That means that understanding what the Bible does say about Jesus' second coming, what it does say about the end of the age, is absolutely central and critical to our lives as disciples. So this is a conversation that we've got to have. So let's set the scene. It says Jesus left the temple. He was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple, but he answered to them, "You see all of these? Do you not truly, I say to you, there will not be one left upon another, not one stone that will not be thrown down." So we have to set the context here. Jesus and his disciples are leaving the temple grounds. We've been studying for the last few weeks that he's been having knockdown, drag out theological blows with all of the powers that be there, Sadducees, Pharisees, chief priests. They've all taken their shots at Jesus. He is leaving now. They're headed toward the Mount of Olives, and they are at the temple complex. And we need to stop for a second and just talk about the grandeur and marvel of at the level of complexity of the complex. Herod's temple complex is basically a wonder of the world. It was insane and opulent. It was like the Taj Mahal would be, something that you look at and you're just not even sure how they built it. The stones at the base of Herod's temple are 200 tons apiece. That's 4 million pounds. And they are fit together so perfectly that you can't slide a piece of paper between them. And so you are talking about something that quite literally we struggle to figure out how we would recreate it today, because it would take 6 or 7 of our biggest cranes just to move one of those blocks. How is he doing that on a mountain back in the first century? It's one of those great mysteries. How did he even accomplish this? And we're blown away standing by it today modernly. The disciples are pointing this out to Jesus like, "Wow, Jesus, look at this. Isn't this insane?" And so they're in awe of the sheer magnitude and brilliance of this whole scene. And Jesus just looks at them and says, "Yeah, man, it's all coming down. Not one stone will be left on top of another." And we have the benefit of hindsight because we know what happened in AD 70. We know that Rome comes and sieges Jerusalem. We know that they get starved out. We know that they sack the temple. We know that they burn everything to the ground and that Jesus' prediction comes true. But they don't have the benefit of hindsight. You got to realize when they're standing beside those 4 million pound stones that are so massive, they've got to be thinking, Jesus, exactly who and what army? Like how? It's impossible. That's crazy. It would be as crazy to them as it would be for us in the modern day if Jesus were here walking to downtown Austin, looking at the Capitol building and saying, it's all going to be leveled, not one stone left upon another. Or even more accurately, it's like him walking on the National Mall with us in Washington, D.C., pointing out the Washington Monument and saying, not one stone left on top of another. It's all coming down. And your first thought would be, well, first of all, I'm not sure how you're going to accomplish that. And your second thought would be, yeah, but how are they going to get across those oceans? You see, what you got to understand is Jesus is saying something that is relevant to us, and it was relevant to them because everybody feels untouchable until they're not. It's Pax Romana. There's no war in Rome right now. They're trying to figure out how to deal with Rome, but the idea that this would be torn down was just as crazy to them as any thoughts of America coming to an end in our minds right now. Like today, if there's a military engagement the world over, some other country, we hear the reports come back, and in 3 days, the entire country has been conquered, and you couldn't take Houston in 3 days. Absolutely not. Some rough boys down there. You got the best of all Texas worlds coming together. It's an armed populace. Come and take it. See, we think we're untouchable too. And so they're not just hearing like, is this impossible? They're trying to think in their minds, what would have to come to pass in order for that to actually be accurate? And this is getting at the heart of what Jesus is saying and why it should be sobering for us. Because Jesus has taken an evaluation of the situation they're in. He has looked at the corrupt priesthood. He has looked at the corrupt governmental structures and how they control people and ruin people. He has looked at the fact that all of their priests are super rich and there's a ruling class that has all the influence and everyone else is oppressed. He's looked at the fact that they're an unrepentant heart, that they're unwilling to repent. He's looked at the fact that everybody thinks that the main answer is going to be a military revolution to kick Rome out. And he is saying, you guys don't understand. The way things are running here are unsustainable. It's all coming down. Things have been set in motion that cannot be reversed. And I don't want us to delude ourselves by thinking that Jesus would show up in America today and see our entire system that is built off of the debt of people and the debt of nations and the corruption of systems that take advantage of people and the unrepentant hearts and the military being the be-all end-all for us solving all of our disputes and not say the exact same thing to us. I don't want us to be disillusioned. I don't want us to think that Jesus wouldn't say, guys, either it's going to change or it is all coming down. We got to realize that this isn't something that's designed just to put fear in our hearts or for me to be a fear monger this morning. But the entire point of what Jesus says to his disciples in response is so that they do not misplace their hope in a system, in a society, in things that can never protect them from what is actually coming. A broken system that doesn't care about them. Because every people in history who have ever thought themselves untouchable have found by woeful experience that they are very touchable. And that even goes for the land of the free and the home of the brave. No people in the prime and their prosperity believe that it's ever coming to an end until disaster is actually upon them. And in light of that, we should be sober-minded and vigilant. It is a reality. It will all come down at some point, guys. Pray that it's not in our lifetime, but if it is, Christians should be the least surprised because this is how the world works. Given all of this, the disciples who are already wrestling with their understanding of the age to come have some questions about this, and those are reasonable questions, the same kind of questions we probably have right now. If you think about John the Baptist, when we studied him some weeks ago, we talked about his idea of how the age was going to come to an end, how the kingdom of God was coming, what the end of the world, so to speak, was going to look like. And he had sort of a two-part eschatology is what we called it. It was a very immediate severing of one kingdom to begin another. It was violent. There was no overlap. One was going out of power and one was coming into power. That's why I used language like the axe is laid at the root already. And when he comes and starts swinging, nobody can save you. It was the fire and brimstone message. And then we talked about how Jesus came and subverted that a little bit with sort of what we called a three-part eschatology, where he said, actually, there's the kingdom that is and the kingdom that is coming. And then there's this overlap period where I'm going to start my kingdom. And he said that it was like yeast being worked into the dough and it grows slowly over time in the intermediary. He said it's like wheat growing along with the tares at the same time, right? He described it as a mustard seed, small and seemingly insignificant, but will grow over time into the largest tree, and all nations of the earth can nest in it. And so you got to understand, this is the background that the disciples have, and believing that he's still there to set up some kind of earthly kingdom that was going to boot Rome from power. And so there's questions that come in their mind in verse 3 as he's telling them this on the Mount of Olives. Tell us when these things will be. They're referring to the first thing he said when he said all of this is going to come down, not one stone will be left on top of another. And then it's important we recognize that he asks a second question. Much of the misinterpretation of this passage and understanding of the end times comes from the unwillingness to make the distinction that there are two questions asked and two answers given in this passage. The second question is, what will be the sign of your coming? Which is a different question than he just provoked. So they ask, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming? Translation, when will the kingdom be here in full? When will this age be over and another will begin? When is the definitive, specific moment of overthrow that the kingdom of the old world is done and the new kingdom is here? And so when we get to this passage and folks start to interpret it, that's where we get into one of the most intensely discussed topics in the Bible, this whole idea of the end times. And we immediately shift into the when is Jesus coming back and let's make predictions and prophecies mentality. We start analyzing and compiling and pulling apart numbers and data, and we start drowning in the details. So before we do that today, let's make two observations about Jesus' answers to them. Just note that two questions were asked, and before we decide what this is about, let's agree to just let Jesus' answer actually be Jesus' answer. And that might sound a little crazy or oversimplified, but it has been hard for people to do for a long time now. Now, I'm going to take a drink because we're about to read a lot of verses. I got to make sure we don't give out. Hold on. I should have taken some volunteers for that, but here we go. We're in Matthew chapter 24. I'm going to read verses 4 through 44. I just want you to follow the narrative. Bear in mind those two things that we've already laid out, that there are two questions asked, two answers given. There's going to be a shift at some point where Jesus starts to move from the first to the second. It says, Jesus answered them, see that no one leads you astray. Very important that we notice that he starts with this. That means that what he's about to say is easily misunderstood, and it'll be easy for people to lead you astray. So let's make sure that you're not led astray. For a time will come, for many will come in my name saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. They will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another, and many false prophets will arise and lead them astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. Please hold that phrase close to you. It's important to interpreting all of what Jesus is delivering in this moment. He says, and the gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and the end will come. Your ability and willingness to endure to the end, your being saved, will be a gospel that will be proclaimed to the entire world before the end comes. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, probably not words actually said by Jesus, by the way. It says, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. And let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And pray, or alas, for women who are pregnant in those days, who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation. Such has not happened from the beginning of the world until now, nor will ever be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, there he is, do not believe it, for false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. So if they say to you, look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. If they say, look, he's in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, and he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one heaven to the other. From the fig tree, learn this lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender, it puts out its leaves, so you know summer is near. So also, when you see all these things, you know that it is near at the very gates. Truly, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Please log that as the beginning of Jesus shifting between the questions that are in view at this moment. This generation standing right here will not pass away till all of this happens. That should inform our interpretation. Verse 36, but as he shifts gears, concerning that day and the hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. Now that is a lot of territory. Congratulations, you made it. Probably everything you've ever heard about the end times and Jesus' second coming claims this passage as its inspiration for the view. But the most important thing we can do is heed what Jesus says first and what Jesus says last. Jesus bookends his answers like this. Verse 4, don't let anyone deceive you. There's a high potential of you being deceived. And verse 36, nobody knows the day or the hour, not even me. And I just want to say there's been so much time, so much energy, so many arguments, so much anxiety, so many bad predictions and interpretations in our modern era have sprung from this passage just because we have not tried to understand the context, we have not understood Jesus' usage of Old Testament symbols, and we have not been willing to just take Jesus at his first and his last word. So up front, as we get ready to dig into this, know that Jesus' whole answer is in response to their question about the destruction of the temple that he just baited them into a few moments before. It's about the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. The whole answer up until the moment where he shifts gears, and it's very notable where he does, right there in verse 36. The whole deal up until when he changes his focus is about the destruction of Jerusalem. And then that second question they ask, when will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? He just plainly says at the very end of that day and hour, nobody knows, not even me right now. You know, something is ironic to me about this whole discussion because we don't consider the implications of not taking Jesus at his word. If you don't believe what Jesus is actually saying for what he's saying, and you're going to interpret more out of this passage than what he says, we have all this hysteria about end times predictions and the premillennial view. The whole bag of dispensations is derived from looking at this passage in a certain way. I just want to call to your attention, Jesus is the Word made flesh. Okay? And he just delivered the full prophecy, and he's the Word made flesh. He's got more command over the Word than any one of us ever will. He is the source of it. He is the Word embodied, and he is saying, based on the Word that I am giving you and the Word that I am and the Word that I know, I do not even know the day or hour that this is going to happen. How wild is it that somebody could pick up the Word and say, Jesus didn't know the day or the hour, but let me show you this chart that'll tell you exactly when the end is coming. Like, hold on, should we stop for a second and question, should we build a whole theology that's basically based on me being able to interpret better from the scriptures than Jesus was able to interpret from the scriptures? Because I don't think we think about that a whole lot. And here is what happens. This becomes a source of all kinds of confusion when we start talking about ideas like the rapture as it's presented popularly, tribulation periods, different views, pre-wrath, post-wrath, premillennial, postmillennial, amillennial. They're all products of this thing called dispensational theology. And here's the crazy thing about it. It actually is really new. Like, we have never lived in a world where people weren't talking about the rapture this way or the end of the world this way. But you know that nobody ever had this idea until the 1830s? In the 1830s, there's a guy named John Darby over in Scotland, and he starts to formulate this theology. He brings it to the United States in the 1860s. And in the 1860s, it's a unique cultural moment. Anyone know what happened in the 1860s? Not a cool time in the United States, right? In the 1860s, on the heels of the Civil War, everybody was struggling to figure out what was going on, because prior to that, the prevailing theology was the kingdom is going forward, manifest destiny, we're spreading the gospel to the entire world, and then the end will come when we've done our job. And everyone thought that was satisfactory until churches started dividing and shooting each other over the right to hold slaves. So Darby arrives in the United States, and we're looking for something that will bring people back together, get us back to a missional idea of church, and something that helps us deal with the fact that we must have misinterpreted how this thing is going to go. And some popular evangelists like Moody pick it up, and then it becomes mainstream in the evangelical church. And from that point on, this worldview has been calling every single person who rises to prominence on the world stage and is a villain, he's been calling them, this is the Antichrist. And every single war that happens and every single rocket that gets fired, see, this is the war that Jesus was talking about in Matthew 24, and it is going to lead to Armageddon. And this has been the source of so many assumptions, prophetic revelations. Later, there's a guy named Hal Lindsey who writes a book called The Late Great Planet Earth, and he's the one who brings out the charts and the math, and he says there's going to be 7 years here and 3.5 years and 3.5 years here, and after this, then you're going to see this, and there's going to be a great world leader who's going to come out of Russia, because that's Gog and Magog, and then they're going to rebuild the third temple after the heifer is purified, and then after the third temple's there, there's going to be a man of peace, and he's going to come, he's the Antichrist, he's going to broker peace, it's going to last for 3 years, and there's going to be a great tribulation, but we're going to get raptured out first, and then woe to them, and then Left Behind becomes a thing, and more of you are probably more familiar with the Left Behind series. Yeah, Left Behind went crazy, and they come and build the back of all of that theology on all of that hysteria. What are we supposed to do with this? This is a lot, man. I actually was talking with someone after the first service, and they said, I grew up in church, but we never talked about those things, yet somehow I ended up with that idea in my head because it's so prevalent in our culture. So we have to talk about this. I just want to call you back to the original guiding principle. What does Jesus actually say? What is the context? He's answering two questions. The first, he provoked by telling him the temple was going to be torn down. And in the second, in response, he says this, verses 4 through 14. Let's look at what he actually tells him. He says, you are going to hear rumors about a coming destruction. There are going to be false messiahs who will promise deliverance. Do not be deceived by their promises. The world is going to get crazy, but it has to, and it's unavoidable. Specifically meaningful, because under Pax Romana, there was not war in the Roman Empire. So the idea of rumors of wars coming would have been shocking to them. They would have paid attention to that. And I think it would be sobering for us as Americans too, because Jesus is telling us that there are always going to be people who are going to be promising that they can save you, just like every president promises that they're the ones that are going to save us. But we should pay attention, because Jesus says there's nobody who can stop what is coming. In verses 32 through 34, he says, this generation will not pass away. If we take Jesus at his word, it means that he's talking about the impending doom that's on Jerusalem. That's going to be within 35, 37 years of what happens. That means the people that he's talking to are going to see all of this come to pass. And he uses all of this apocalyptic language, like the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, angels coming with a trumpet, power and glory coming on the clouds, gathering the winds, taking the elect to the four corners of the earth. And that does sound a lot like Revelation. And it sounds really wild and fantastical. But if you understand the Old Testament context that he's drawing from, he's still talking about Jerusalem, because he quotes passages in Daniel and he quotes passages in Isaiah that are about the faithful of God needing to persevere through difficult times. So Jesus says you're going to need to persevere, and then he uses Old Testament passages that tell them you're going to need to persevere. He is hammering home his point. Now, this is a rabbit hole about what Jesus is doing with this Old Testament symbology, and I know what you guys like to do with that. We do not have time today to talk about all of those symbols, so I will just go ahead and rest in peace my email inbox and say, email me AD 70 if you would like to talk about this, because I would love to share with you how deep it actually goes. It is unmistakable. We might find some time to dig into it in the coming weeks. I don't know. No promises. But just know today that he's using specific language and imagery from those two prophets, telling the disciples that what is coming cannot be undone and you will not have a way out of it. Your job is to persevere by faith. In verses 15 through 31, this is the section in the passage where people start talking about the rapture because it's talking about two people being there and one being taken away. But I want you to look at the context that he's using. He's referencing Noah right away. And he's saying that nobody knew that the flood was going to happen until the flood came and took them away. And a good question for us to ask when we're talking about being left behind, if you will, about being snatched away in the twinkling of an eye, if you will, about being taken away, if you will, is if we look at the story of Noah, who actually got taken away? Because rapture theology would say that the real Christians are the ones that get snatched away, and then the evil people are left on earth and they have to deal with the judgment. But if Jesus is using the story of Noah to tell them what it's going to be like, it was the righteous that stayed in the boat and the evil that got washed away. So that doesn't really match up with what Jesus is saying. And then if you think about the parable of the fish in the net that we talked about a few weeks ago, which fish got taken away? Yeah, the ones that weren't worth anything. And you remember the parable of the wheat and the tares, and what Jesus says is going to happen to the wheat and the tares. They're growing up together, but in the judgment, the tares are going to get separated and what? Cast into the fire. They're going to get thrown away. And then you see a little bit of it here in Matthew 24, but in Luke's parallel account of this exact moment in chapter 17, he says, I tell you that in that night there will be two in bed. One will be taken, the other left. There will be two women grinding together. One will be taken, the other left. And they said to him, where, Lord? Like, where are they being taken? And he says to them, where the corpse is, the vultures will gather. Now, hold on just a second. If the people that are taken are going where the corpses are and the vultures gather, that doesn't sound like they're being caught up to heaven the way that this rapture theology has tried to teach everybody for the last 4 or 5 decades. It sounds like the exact opposite is being said by Jesus, that actually, no, in all of these parables and in all of these stories, being left behind is actually what you want. Because the people being taken away are being taken away to destruction. So if you were taught about this whole framework growing up where it just kind of came into you through being saturated in the culture, I want you to know if you grew up being scared you were going to be left behind, actually, you don't have to be afraid of that anymore. Because if I look at Jesus' example of Noah and all of his parables, that's exactly where you're going to want to be. So if you're just reading the words of Jesus honestly, you realize that the way this has been presented has been co-opted and it has been backwards. So I hope you can see that this teaching or the doctrine of the rapture, at least as presented by what we call dispensationalists and premillennialism and a lot of popular interpretations out there, the whole left behind ethos is actually the thing that is best left behind. Because Jesus' point is that nobody's going to be ready for the coming destruction of Jerusalem. Nobody can tell the future, and destruction always comes when people least expect it. Now he finally shifts gears in verse 36, and in verse 36 he says, but of that day, no one will know. Not even the angels in heaven, not even the Son, but the Father only. And here's a shift in his answer. So what does Jesus answer to the temple being torn down and not one block being left upon another? It's all about to happen. No one's going to see it coming. Your job is to persevere. What is his answer to their second question? What is the sign of your coming and the end of your age? Nobody knows. And you never will. I don't even know. But then he goes on to tell a series of parables after that that say, even though you don't know the day or the hour, you should be looking for it. You should be ready for it. You should be watching for it, and not just watching for it. You should be yearning for it. You should be hoping for it. Keep the oil in your lamps burning because you don't know when this is going to happen. And this last little bit is really important because I think with the confusion of everything that we've just barely touched the surface on for the last few minutes, we have a temptation to say, yeah, I don't believe all of that stuff. All I know is that there's going to be a second coming, I think, and I'm just trying to make sure I get to heaven after it happens. Like maybe it's probably not going to happen in my life, and we just think it's a thing that may happen, but we never really live our lives like it's real. And we can make the mistake of correcting, teaching and then sort of say, no one knows the day or the hour, so we never think about the second coming. But if Jesus says you're supposed to watch for it, you're supposed to look for it, you're supposed to long for it, it has to be important. And if it's said over 300 times in the New Testament, that means it should be important. It's got to be important. So let me, in the time that we have left this morning, just give you 3 basic reasons that you should be thinking about the second coming every day. That you should be thinking about the second coming, that it should be important in your life, that it doesn't just get cast away. Here are the 3 reasons. Number 1 is for the sake of this world that we live in. And that might sound strange, but the second coming means that God is actually going to put things right. It means there is a day of reckoning. It means there is a day that all that is broken gets undone. It means there is a day, as Jesus says, that he is coming with the presence of God. In the presence of God, no sickness can exist, no sin can exist, no brokenness can exist. Anything that is not perfect, anything that is not sealed by the presence of God himself gets burned away. It means that the ultimate day is coming when all poverty, all injustice, all selfishness, all violence, all disease, all hunger, all death is actually going away. And so far from the hope of being raptured away somewhere else and that the world is just doomed and irredeemable and the only thing matters is just escaping to heaven, when you understand what Jesus actually says about the second coming, it should create an endless hope in you. For those of you who have dedicated your life to education or serving others or first responders or to eradicate suffering or to alleviate the pain of this world, you get to know that you have partnered with God in the project of redemption and your works do follow you and what you do does matter and it matters right now and it will matter forever. The second coming means that we don't have to look around at the world cynically thinking we're never actually going to get anywhere. We're just biding our time. And hopefully I'm good enough to get into heaven when my time is done. The second coming of Jesus Christ is good news for people whose lives are filled with bad news. And that should be all of us. I think also along with this hope for the world is that the idea that Jesus coming back should challenge our selfishness and our self-absorption. Because I think sometimes we yawn at the idea of the second coming. It doesn't really move us. Like, does it excite you? Does it like when I say there is going to be a second coming of Jesus, he is coming back, does that light up emotion inside of you? Do you get excited about that? Some of y'all who are probably like less than 30 and your legs haven't started hurting for no reason are kind of like, yeah, I want Jesus to come back, but I kind of want to do some fun stuff first. Like, is that you? You got to understand the reason why Jesus says, wake up. Don't yawn, watch, yearn, long. He says that you are missing it. Because it takes a special kind of privilege and life of comfort to not think the second coming is the thing you should be looking for and hoping for. Because nobody in a third world country that doesn't know where their next meal is coming from hears about the second coming and doesn't get enthusiastic and filled with joy and excited, and it doesn't revolutionize their entire life and the way of seeing life. No woman in a country where if you misspeak can get punched in the face or have her husband call some guys to come and rough her up to teach her a lesson thinks about the second coming and yawns and sleeps on it or wants to stay in this world a little bit longer. Nobody who has dealt with real suffering and real pain thinks about Jesus coming back a second time, and it doesn't change the way they interpret all of their life experiences and light them on fire with joy. No, they yearn for it. They long for it. They watch for it. This is why Jesus says that the gospel reaches the poor and downtrodden before it reaches those of us who, hey man, welcome to Target. Life is pretty easy. So if your own life is so comfortable that thinking about Jesus coming back is not exciting to you, then please at least think of it for the world. Because there are people who don't get the privilege of being like we are. We're like the most uncomfortable thing about today is that we had a really good long communion that was necessary. And that means Marcus is going to probably be stubborn and still do his whole thing. And we are definitely getting to lunch. Like, if that's the biggest problem you have today, then I want you to think about the people in the world that have real issues. And Jesus coming back is good for them. If you're not going to yearn for the second coming for you, do it for them because the world needs it. Second, This is also important for my sake, for all of our sakes, and our own integrity, our ethics, and our personal growth. Because the reality of the fact that no one knows the day or the hour but the Father, combined with the absolute certainty that it is going to happen, should create a powerful incentive for your integrity. Because if you know that Jesus is coming back, but you don't know when it's going to happen, you just know that it's going to happen, that means that you cannot afford in your life to say that the ends justify the means. Because if you are doing something that you know you shouldn't do, hoping you can just make it to the end, how do you know that that sky is not going to open up and the clouds are not going to roll back and Jesus is going to catch you right in the middle of you thinking you could game the system? Because if you knew the day that you were going to die and you knew the day that he was going to come back, there'd be a whole lot you would think you could get away with. But since none of us know, it's a really good incentive for us to be doing things for the right reasons. No one can assume that no one sees what you're doing because we know. C.S. Lewis said, "No one sees what I'm doing back here because how do you know that the irresistible light won't stream in on you at any minute?" He is saying you can't live your life that way if you know that God could come at any time. So this doctrine of the second coming, this teaching, teaches us, as one minister said, to dress our souls not for the electric lights of our buildings, but to dress our lives for the daylight of the next world, knowing that that light will last forever. And here is the last reason, the third reason. And I think it might be the most provocative or controversial thing that I've actually said all morning. And you might say, well, that's really hard to believe, Marcus, and I agree. But listen, the fact that Jesus is coming back is one of the only things that's going to be powerful enough for you to actually learn to forgive somebody and mean it. The fact that Jesus is coming back is one of the only things powerful enough for you to actually make peace with people and forgive people who have actually done you considerable wrong. How do I know this is true? Because when someone does wrong to us, we have a natural human impulse to judge right into God's chair and judge them. And not only do we become convinced that we know what they deserve for wronging us and that we know why they wronged us and that they have no excuse for wronging us, we also become convinced that we would like to see them get what they deserve. And we're even more convinced that beyond them getting what they deserve, we would like to be part of the one that gets to give them what they deserve. And as soon as someone wrongs you, we immediately go and we sit in that seat. But here is the problem. We don't know what they deserve, do we? We don't know them down to the bottom. We don't know the circumstances of their life. That's above our pay grade. That's God's chair. And if you allow yourself to sit in God's chair long enough, it distorts you and it corrupts you and it twists you. You can be bitter and unforgiving to people and it puts you in prison. Because when you're in that prison, you start to make generalizations about everybody. And it wasn't just a bad relationship, it was all men. And it wasn't just a bad relationship, it was all women. And it wasn't just a poor policy choice, it's all Republicans or all Democrats or all people from here and all people from there. This is what we start doing to people. It blinds us to who people really are. And I know you've experienced this before because you've got mutual friends. Like if, Sebastian really did something wrong to Alan, which he probably has because that's the relationship that youth ministers just have with kids sometimes. And Sebastian came to me like, "You won't believe what Alan did, man. And he always does this and he's just this kind of person." And I know Alan and I know, hey, they've got a disagreement, but Alan isn't really the person that Sebastian is telling me that he is. But Sebastian has decided in his head to create this cartoon of a person that he is now sitting in judgment on. They don't actually have beef, like they love each other, I think, even though they sit on opposite sides of the auditorium. I was just using that for an example. You guys hug that out when we're done. I'm just saying we've all experienced what we do to people. And I'm saying that understanding the hope of the second coming is the only thing that's going to allow you to allow God to be the judge of the world. Because he's the only one that knows what all of us have been through. And it should also remind us that he's the only one that actually has the power to make things right. So not only does God know what people deserve, he's the only one that has the power to actually give people what they deserve. See, when you know that someday Jesus is coming back and in that day, God is going to put everything right, you can rest easy in the reality that not one of us is getting away with a doggone thing. It's all coming to light. It's all going to be exposed. All justice is going to be done. Every wrong that has been done to you is going to be redeemed. Everything that has gone wrong, every crying child, every abused mother, every single person, it's all going to be dealt with. When you know that, you can afford to look at God and say, you got it. I can make peace. I can get out of the judgment seat. I can forgive. But only knowing that there is going to be a day when that happens is going to give you the courage and the resources to actually give it up and forgive somebody. The reason why you haven't forgiven the person that you're thinking about right now is somehow you think, if I let them off the hook, nobody's going to pay. They're just going to get off scot-free, and I can't let that happen. It hurts too much. And some of you are thinking, well, isn't that wonderful, Marcus? You took us on a long, winding adventure to diffuse all the problems with this one particular idea of interpretation, and all you did in the end was just create a bigger problem for us. And some of you are like, I don't get it. That sounds pretty good. I like the idea of a judgment day where God is going to come and deal with all of the people who have really screwed up and done me wrong in my life. But some of you are ahead of me and you're thinking, oh no. There's an implication to this that is actually pretty big, and I don't know if I like what it says to me, because you got to realize that, look, if there is no judgment day, if there is no day where God's going to put things right, if there is no second coming, then that means there's no hope for the world. There really isn't. It means that all of the blood that is cried out from the ground from Abel on until now, evil has its day and will never have to pay. It means there will be no justice. There will be no putting right. Everything that has happened in this earth that is just ugly and broken is. And evil has won. No one's ever got to deal with it. No one ever has to pay. That's what it means if there's no judgment day. But on the other hand, if Jesus is coming back and there is a judgment day, what hope is there for me? I mean, really? Y'all aren't sitting in here because you think you're perfect without flaws. Y'all aren't sitting in here perfect because you think you can get to heaven on your own. Y'all aren't sitting here perfect because you got it all figured out. Everybody is in this room or listening at some point in the future because they know that of all that blood that cries out from the ground, some of it is on my hands. And I got no way to deal with it. I don't live like I should. And if there's some really righteous people in here who think, yeah, I'm with you, Marcus, but that's most people. I really have tried to do right by everybody. I think I'll be good on Judgment Day, and I can't wait for people to get what they deserve. I'm not getting out of that judgment chair because somebody's got to do it. If that's you, I just want to do a little thought exercise with you as we close down today. I just want you to imagine that based on whatever generation you're from, when you get to the Judgment Day, God decides he's going to be extra merciful. And I say based on whatever generation you're from because it's probably going to look a little bit different. When you get to the Judgment Day, God's going to look and he's going to say, I'm actually going to be more merciful and gracious than you realize. I'm not going to judge you by my standard. And he walks up to you, and if you're the age of 70 or older, he's going to walk up to you and snap an invisible 8-track player off of your neck. Some of y'all who are a little more bougie, he's going to pull an actual 45 from around your neck. He's going to pull an MP3 player, Sony Walkman, whatever it was. He's going to pull your Spotify right off your neck. You're going to say, I didn't know that was there. He's going to say, that's cool. It's invisible. It's just a feature. He's going to say, you know what? I'm not going to judge you by my standards, but what we're going to do is we're just going to play this back, and I'm only going to judge you by your standards. I'm going to judge you by every time you told someone else how they should be living their life and how your life measured up to that. I'm going to judge you by every thought that you've had. I'm going to judge you only by all the idle words that you spoke, just like I promised back when I was giving my gospel in Matthew. And if you really think that Judgment Day is a good sign for those of us who are better than all those other people, I just want to ask you, how are you making out in that scenario? Even if God didn't judge you by his standards, not one of us would survive. Not one of us could stand. You want to stand there as Jesus plays back every thought you've had about other people, every judgmental, critical thought, every graceless thought, every I hope something terrible happens to them, everything that you've ever let come out of the poison of your... Do you really think that you're going to be justified standing in front of that? See, this is a big problem. The problem is if there is no judgment day, then there's no hope for the world being put right. And if there is a judgment day, then what hope is there for me? You know, all through Matthew chapter 24, when Jesus is answering their first question, When are these things that you're talking about going to be? When is no stone going to be left on top of another stone? You see Jesus using a lot of metaphoric language, Old Testament imagery when he's quoting Isaiah and he's quoting Daniel. He talks about the coming judgment on Jerusalem in this way, that the lights in the sky are going to be put out, that the sun is going to go dark, that there's going to be a great shaking that happens, and the powers of heaven are going to be shaking. And in Mark's account, he says the same thing, darkness and a great shaking and rocks cracking. See, darkness and rocks cracking are always language that accompanies a judgment in the scripture. And I just want to direct your attention as a spoiler to something that we're going to talk about in a few weeks. If you look forward in Matthew chapter 27, a few chapters from here, you're going to find Jesus on the cross. And what happens when Jesus is on the cross, wouldn't you know it, is the sun goes dark. There's complete darkness. And there's an earthquake, and there's a violent shaking, and the veil of the temple is torn, and the rocks split, and the graves give up their dead. And if you were paying attention to the way that Jesus talks about judgment, you would watch the crucifixion, and you would say, this looks a lot like a judgment day. And if you're thinking it looks a lot like a judgment day, that's because it is. We talked about Jesus in his second coming, bringing the presence of God in its fullness, the presence of God. But on the cross, Jesus gave up the presence of God. And he was left alone there. And he felt and experienced the devastating absence of God. Why does this matter? Why would he do this? Because in his second coming, he's coming with light and judgment. But at the first coming, Jesus faced the dark. At the first coming, Jesus didn't come to bring judgment. He came to take judgment. And on that cross, he took the absence of God in our place. On that cross, he endured rejection, the death that we all deserve, the death we all deserve to die. He let darkness come down and surround him. Why? Jesus is paying the penalty so that we can have the presence of God again, so that we can be in relationship with God again, so that we can have love again, so that we can walk in the light again, so that we can have life. Here is the gospel from Matthew chapter 24. Here's what it means. It means the creator and judge of the universe was willing to take the judgment for you. That the king of the universe was willing to leave the throne, leave the judgment seat, if you will, and stand instead condemned in your place. This is what the gospel of Matthew 24 teaches, that to become a Christian is to say, I know that I could never stand on my own in the judgment. I could never pass. Not even my own standards could I pass. But my judge, my Jesus, my Lord was willing to come and take the judgment for me. And since he took the judgment for me, I surrender my life in humble repentance. And when I am baptized into his death, I trust in his blood for forgiveness, and I rise new like him, because it's not about what I do, it is about what he has done. That is the gospel from Matthew 24, not charts and graphs and math. To become a Christian means that we get to praise and serve a risen Lord who didn't just come once, but who is coming twice. And that when he comes again, we don't have to fear. We can do exactly what he asked. We can persevere. Because in that moment, when the presence of God is here, all that is wrong with the world gets burned away. All disease, all death, all sadness, all selfishness. And so that means despite all of the unraveling and unpacking that we had to do today, the real message, the real truth underneath of this is that we can and we should watch and we should long and we should hope for Jesus to come again. My parting message for you this morning when it comes to thinking about the second coming of Jesus is simply this. Leave behind the hype, but hold closely to the hope. Preach that gospel to yourself every single day, because the world is going to get crazy and there's nothing that can stop it. But if you're with Jesus, you don't have to be afraid. We serve a good God. Today would be a fantastic day if you need to take a step towards Jesus. And we'd love to join you here as we sing this invitation song in the front or the back. If we can assist you in any way, please come as we stand and sing.